For a number of years, I was a camp counselor at an overnight camp in the Muskokas. I loved it more than any job I ever had, despite the non-existent pay, annoying campers, long days and short nights, crappy food, etc. For one, I got to tell as many scary stories as I could sputter out. There was nothing better than hanging around a dying campfire with a bunch of junior high kids who were demanding the scariest, most blood-curdling tales I knew. And I told them all. The babysitter and the eerie clown statue. The driver and the creepy gas attendant. The woman and her licking dog. I saved my best stories for the overnight trips we made in Algonquin Park. For non-Canadians, it's a massive park in the middle of Ontario, spanning nearly 8,000 square kilometers. When days would be spent canoeing on the pristine lakes, and nights would be spent around the campfire, singing and making s'mores and being as rowdy as the only people within miles could be. Once the kids had quieted down, I told them stories of a stalker in the woods with a face so horrifying it paralyzed all of its victims in fear. Or the group of campers who decided to spend a night across the lake from an abandoned, or was it, insane asylum. On this particular night, I finished up the tales, once again, insisting that they were all entirely true, and sent the campers to their tents. It had been an exhausting day, and none of the 6 kids were in any mood to stay up any later. My fellow counselor had also decided to pack it in, leaving me on a fallen log next to the dying fire. I took a deep breath of the cool, fresh, pine-scented air and looked out at the lake. The partial moon reflected off of the glassy water, and on the other side I could see a towering cliff, going up several hundred feet. I considered whether we would canoe over, climb up a few dozen feet, and do some cliff jumping. I grinned. The camp director would have my head if we did that. If he found out, that is. Movement at the very top of the cliffs caught my eye. There was a small light bobbing along the peak. At first I thought it was a star, but it was larger and gave off a golden glow. It slowly moved back and forth in a small arc. As I sat up and watched it, another appeared next to it, bobbing along the top of the cliff. Then another, and a few more. My stomach dropped into my feet. I grabbed my bag and pulled out my digital camera, then focused it on the little glowing orbs and then used the zoom function. I counted them, and then I counted again. Shit. In a flash, I was up and running to the tents. Hey guys, wake up, we gotta go. There was movement in the tents, and then I had 7 confused heads looking out at me. My co-counselor wore a mixture of concern and pure anger. I hate to do this, I continued, but the clouds are looking really threatening. There's a big rainstorm coming in. If we get caught in it, it's gonna ruin our trip.
Seriously?
Laura, my co-counselor, asked.
We're in the middle of the woods. Where would we go?
I pulled out a map and a flashlight out of my bag. There's a ranger station a few kilometers south of us. I traced the path with my finger. Thank God. We can make it there in a few hours. The campers groaned.
Can't we just go in the morning?
No, I shouted, my voice echoing across the lake. I lowered it. Come on, let's pack up and go. I'll tell you a story along the way. I smiled, though I could feel my lips quivering. It's the best one I know. That seemed to get them going, and within 10 minutes, the tents were packed up and we'd begun our trek into the deep woods, with small flashlights our only guide. When I was confident we were moving at a steady pace, I allowed myself to relax and began to tell my favorite campfire story. Centuries before the European settlers made their way into the country, it was inhabited by the First Nations people. They had made the trip from across western Canada, following the migration patterns of large animals such as buffalo and bison. Eventually, they reached Ontario, at which point they split off into smaller groups of travelers, each searching for a section of land to call their own. Well, legend has it that one group, consisting of about 20 men, women, and children, had ventured through this very area in search of a place to call home. Though it wasn't even the end of October, the weather had made a turn for the worse. And as the group journeyed around the lake, a fierce blizzard hit. Within an hour, the group found themselves in blinding snow and below zero temperatures. The clothes they had on them were all made for fall, not this sort of weather. But they pressed on. They didn't have any other choice. Night was falling as they reached a cliff, which towered over a cold, choppy lake. There was no stopping for this group. They'd die if they didn't make it past the cliffs. But with darkness setting in, and the snow falling even harder, visibility was almost non-existent. So, one of the elders had an idea. Using the little kerosene they had left, he lit a lantern for each of the travelers and had them carry it in front of them. Not so that they could see the cliffs, but so they could see who was in front of them, allowing them to follow each other across the narrow bluffs. With the strongest of the men leading the way, the group began to cross the cliffs. The freezing, wet snow soaked every bone in their body. The harsh wind chilled any exposed skin and threatened to push them right off the rocks. Their path was no more than a few feet wide and would have been slippery to even the best of hiking boots, let alone their hand-fashioned moccasins. Slowly, painstakingly slowly, they made their way up the cliffs, praying that whatever lay on the other side could shelter them from the intensifying storm. They were about halfway up, hundreds of feet above the lake, though it was all well out of their vision. In fact, all they could see in the blinding storm was the lantern in front of them, acting as a beacon to guide their steps. If the light moved up, they moved up. If it went down, they went down. Each of the travelers was almost in a trance, caring about nothing but the glowing orb a few feet away. For the leader, though, there was no such luxury. He moved forward blindingly, feeling along the cliffs with his free arm, though his skin was so numb he could barely feel anything. As the path wound back again, he made a misstep and lost his footing, just as a gust of wind blasted his back. He desperately grabbed at rocks, but his frozen fingers couldn't grasp anything. With a terrified scream, he slipped off the cliffs and fell into the icy black lake. The rest of the party didn't see him fall, of course. All they saw was his glowing orb dropping away from the bluff and disappearing into the darkness. There was no time to mourn. They continued on, but the storm was worsening. After another minute, one of the children, his body, unable to withstand the cold any longer, dropped away, his lantern glowing until the choppy waters put it out. Another, having seen this, lost his balance and fell. This pattern went on until there were just 5 people left, fumbling along in the darkness, following the light in front. As hard as they tried, the cliffs were unforgiving. The remaining men fell down to 4, then 3, then 2, and then there was just one left, who legend says cursed the earth as his legs slipped and he plunged hundreds of feet down. His lantern, the last one to be extinguished. Of the 20 members who tried to overcome the cliffs, I finished, not a single one of them survived. They say that sometimes, when the night conditions are right, you can see orbs along the cliff, symbols of the lost travelers who will never find their homes. As the story ended, leaving the campers in an eerie silence, I saw lights up ahead, a wave of relief pouring over me. We picked up the pace and found the ranger station bursting with activity, with a half-dozen people running around, loading up trucks and shouting into radios. The wind was really beginning to pick up, and I heard thunder in the distance. "Hey, you kids! A large, burly man with a full beard and mustache ran up to us.
"Get in the trucks. We don't have much time."
Laura and I led the kids into one of the pickup trucks. "What's going on?" I asked the man.
"Didn't you hear?
Another gust of wind.
Huge storm system's heading right for us. Already been tornadoes touched down. We're getting everyone out of here. Let's go."
We all climbed into the truck's bed. I collapsed down, feeling like I'd just been punched in the gut. The ranger climbed into the front and we took off down a makeshift road. My head was spinning. It wasn't possible.
How?
Laura slid next to me, keeping her voice low.
How did you know we had to get out of there?
I looked over at her. My face felt empty of any blood. I saw the lights.
What? No. No!
She gasped, then caught herself.
How many?
I took a deep breath. 8. She looked around at all the campers who were now lying against each other, asleep despite the bumpy road.
That's all of us. My God.
I nodded and leaned against her. Laura had heard the traveler's story before, and she knew that I left out a key bit of information. The lights were real, but they were never random. If they were shining, bobbing back and forth, swinging in a small arc, it was because they had a message, a warning. One light would shine for each person who was about to die. The Canary's call echoed against the tunnel's damp walls, leading us deeper into the darkness. We'd long since left the vicinity of our mining lights, relying on lanterns to navigate the porous cave and its uneven, muddy floor. Where else were we supposed to go? The cave-in had obliterated our only exit. It was either stay put and risk starving to death, or proceed through the mountain's natural tunnels in the hopes of finding freedom. Carson, an experienced miner, had begun leading us from the front. The fear of the unknown had me unnerved, but I knew we'd be okay. As long as the Canary kept singing, we would all be okay. The ceiling encroached on us as we advanced, bringing its finger-shaped stalactites closer and closer to us. I wiped sweat from my brow and peered ahead. Darkness. We walked for hours without a breath of fresh air. I could feel myself growing tired, but refused to slow my pace. If my team could keep walking, then so could I. The shuffling of our feet, the Canary's tune, and the sound of dripping water were all that was heard in the dim tunnel. We weren't wasting precious oxygen on idle chit-chat. The farther we went, the tighter the passages. My head began to spin from fatigue and dehydration. I needed to throw up, but I couldn't allow myself to do so in such a small space. I knew the scent would linger for the rest of our journey. That Canary's call was a beacon of hope. It was my light at the end of the tunnel. A promise that the next stretch of the journey would be safe. It kept me and my fellow miners from panicking. As long as the Canary kept singing, we'd be okay. I tried to focus on the melody and close my eyes, imagining the blue sky above my house. I thought about being in my daughter's loving arms again, and the days we would spend watching the birds perched on our picket fence. And then I stumbled I was back in the cave, back in the miserable muck of dirt and sweat. Maybe I just needed to distance myself from the others. Perhaps my position near the end of the line was starting to weigh on me. Maybe I just needed to feel like I was closer to the exit. I pushed past the procession, head spinning more and more the closer I got to the front. I felt a sinking feeling at the pit of my stomach, at the sight of it. The Canary lay lifeless in its cage. Carson, face swollen and worn, turned towards me. He slowly brought a grime-caked index finger to his lips, soundlessly shushing me, before dropping his hand. He turned to the front, curled his lips into an O, and blew. I understood then and there that we weren't making it out of here alive.
As a man who has always collected bits and straggles of strange and forgotten lore, I sometimes like to tell this tale to late-night visitors, such as yourself, as we dive into our cups and get drunk far into the evening. It comes straight from the yellowed, rumpled pages of an old diary that I found whilst perusing the contents of a deceased tycoon's manor and estate. There were many strange entries in that journal, but this one in particular strummed a primal, grating chord of fear in my heart, and I won't ever forget it. It was dated July 19th, 1927, and it read, I recently attended what could only be described as a wake-in waiting for an elderly gent with whom I have had a passing acquaintance for some years now. I was invited to his summer estate by telegram, under pretense that a number of people in his circle of friends were to come and enjoy a week-long retreat of bonfires, boating, and good cheer. Instead, we were treated to the horror of an old man in the last stages of a wasting disease. A hollow-eyed, skeletal madman who ranted ceaselessly that his young wife was, in fact, the familiar of a demon to which he had sold his soul many years before. We were there, he informed us, to make sure that she didn't perpetrate any violence to his person, with the intent of speeding his death. His pretty young wife was Asiatic in appearance and could speak not a single word of English. She gazed sorrowfully down from her husband's bedside the whole 5 days that it took for him to die. The old man begged his guests to take turns at a 24-hour watch, and, not knowing what else to do, we obliged him. It was during my watch when he began to rattle his last few breaths, and I called to the others to rouse themselves from their slumber and join me. Our host's eyes were wild with fear. He clawed feebly at the doctor's sleeves as he died, clutching at them, as if to hold on and not be dragged away. Unmoving, his wife watched it all. We all bowed our heads in silence to his demise, except for a maid who was present in the room and blind since birth. The maid stared with milky eyes at the new widow beside the bed, and it began to scream. She's eating him! She's eating him! Dear God! She's eating him!
A mother had awoken in the middle of the night. Her bedroom was completely dark. She blindly felt around her nightstand for her phone. She picked it up, and the bright light emitting from the device illuminated the room with a soft glow. The time on her cell phone read 2:20 a.m. She sighed. She had awoken as early as 1 a.m. the past few nights. The cause was likely to be the strange dream she'd been having. Although tonight, she had no such dreams, and she thought this was a little strange. She shifted in her bed uncomfortably. Something just didn't feel right about the room. It was as if the walls and the windows were watching her move, as if they were silently judging her harshly, giving her a verdict that she didn't deserve. She eventually drifted off back to sleep and had a pleasant rest. That is, until she awoke to the sound of screaming. It appeared to be coming from the alarm clock next to her. She didn't even know why she had it. It didn't display the time because it was broken, and its only other function was that it could act as a radio. She groaned. Sometimes the alarm clock would turn on by itself, tuning to a station at random. She thought that it must have been the local horror station, which she didn't enjoy very often. It was old-fashioned, made to seem like you were listening to a radio from centuries past. She flipped the switch on the alarm clock, and instantly, the screaming stopped. She checked the time on her phone again. 3:32 a.m. She had to get up early to go to a job interview in the morning. She couldn't afford to be late the first day. She fell asleep again almost immediately. She awoke at 5 a.m., as she had set the alarm on her phone. Again, she only uses the radio function on the actual alarm clock. She quickly got up and started buttoning up a shirt she had chosen for the interview. She turned around, looking at the bed that she had just gotten out of. When she realized something that made her eyes widen and her hands shake in terror. The alarm clock was on the floor before she went to bed. She had knocked it off and forgot to pick it back up. The thing she had heard in the middle of the night. The thing she had turned off was in fact a baby monitor she used to communicate with her child. We hadn't always been here, but the neighborhood has. Even before it was a neighborhood on Earth, this one had always been here. Here for those that would be lost on those cursed grounds. Here for those who would die long before their real life ever truly began. Here for those who never really wanted to grow up. We come from different times and we come from different lives, but one thing's remained true of us all. We lived on the earthly realm of the neighborhood at some point in our lives, and died long before our time was supposed to come. We don't remember much of our lives in the Cul-De-Sac since the last member of our group joined us, and certainly we won't remember now when the next spirit comes. But here's what we do know. Rolf was the first to come here. Unlike most of us, he was born in far-off lands and even in the afterlife hasn't lost his touch of his old-world upbringing. He lived in the neighborhood before it was developed. The son of a shepherd, he and the rest of his family came to start a farm on the lands that would soon turn into the place we would all eventually reside in. Rolf died in 1903. While tending to the family's animals, a bull broke loose from its pen and, in Rolf's efforts to stop the beast, he was trampled to death. That is why, even though he brought many of the family's livestock with him in spirit, he chose not to bring the cattle along. He continues to go about the farm's business on a daily basis, but is more than happy to occasionally neglect them to play with the other children of the neighborhood. Johnny was always a lonely child. In fact, Rolf actually became his first human friend ever since he came to the Cul-De-Sac after his death. His parents moved onto the grounds of Rolf's former farm not long after his death. With no other children around and no field work to take up the time as it did Rolf's, Johnny drew into his own mind to a great extent, from which his imaginary friend Plank was born. Together, they wandered about the countryside, climbing trees and getting themselves into trouble. Sadly, this didn't last forever, as a few years later, Johnny became bedridden with illness. In 1922, he died after a long battle with tuberculosis. He saw his imaginary friend Plank standing by him to his last breath. Even now in the afterlife, without the countryside to play in, Johnny still wastes much of his time frolicking through the backyards and streets. Eddie was the next to arrive. Eddie was born in New York City, but moved to the neighborhood in 1932, just as the Great Depression was hitting full swing. The neighborhood, while still different, was beginning to take form from its fields of its past as families moved in and split up the lands that had once belonged to Rolf's family. Always a schemer, Eddie looked to do anything to bring some comfort to his very bare family life, even if it cost him the friendship of others. Eddie died in 1939 after one of his grand plans to swindle a sap backfired. He drowned trying to cross the local river after trying to run away from the angry kids that he had deceived. Even in the afterlife, Eddie keeps chasing after that almighty dollar. Sarah and Ed came together not too long after that. By the late 40s, the Cul-De-Sac had already nearly taken its final form, as one of the pre-planned developments that became popular in the post-war era. As brother and sister growing up in the chaos of World War II, they both had various ways of escaping their lives as children of a dead GI and a working mother. Sarah became enraged and controlling as she sought to make sure that everyone around her knew that she was in charge, all in an attempt to copy off her view of the hustle and bustle of her often working mother. Ed, on the other hand, went about it a completely different way. He just shut it out entirely. In fact, he shut out nearly everyone and everything, becoming what appeared to be an idiot on the outside. Instead, Ed chose to become completely involved in the monster movies and comic books that began to pop up after the war had ended. It wasn't too long after this that, in 1953, Ed and Sarah died in a car wreck as their mother was taking them to visit their grandparents. Naz came shortly after the brother and sister. Naz was a flower child, born to a pair of hippies turned establishment in the late 60s. She was a naturally beautiful girl that had always had a way with boys and men alike. She lived life on a whim and would often go about flirting and playing without any intentions. She died in possibly the most horrible way of any children in the neighborhood. In the summer of '79, a serial killer who had broken out of the local asylum had slipped into her house in the dead of night and murdered her along with her entire family. In the trauma of these events, she, in a way similar to Ed, shut out the world entirely and forgot her parents and siblings, which is why in the afterlife, she doesn't ever receive demands from the non-existent parents unlike many of the others. This gives her much more time to lounge around and party as she often does. It wasn't too long before Double D joined the rest of the neighborhood. He was the child of two highly controlling professionals in the age of greed that, despite their constant absence, dominated his life. As such, Double D became quite the intellectual and a rather meek, shy figure. Always the curious type, he loved to experiment when given the time away from school and the constant chores of his parents. This would ultimately lead to his untimely demise in 1986, as a gas leak combined with a Bunsen burner from one of his experiments tore him and his house to pieces.
Being the timid and subservient type, between various misadventures, Double D continued to follow the written orders of his parents long after his death. Kevin was next to join the group. He was born to the day of Double D's death, and is in many ways his polar opposite. Kevin came from a broken home and developed a bold personality. In life, he was cynical and angry and took it out on many of the other children. His abusive father would rarely pay him any attention in life and would end up bringing about the end of it. In a drunken rage, his father beat him after Kevin attempted to stand up to him. Kevin died on the way to the hospital in the winter of 1999. His father spent the rest of his life in prison. In the afterlife, Kevin changed his perception to the opposite of what his life really was, with a distant father who would shower him with gifts. However, he continued to maintain his bullying even in death. Jimmy was the last to come to the Cul-De-Sac. He died in 2000, not long after moving to the house that Kevin's father had once lived in. Jimmy had leukemia since he was barely old enough to walk. As such, he was always a very sickly child, and due to his overprotective parents, he never really got to be around other children. He lived his days out in a small bedroom completely neglected by the outside world. Jimmy lingered for quite some time in a state of near death, but in the end, finally caved into the suffering of his lifelong illness. The Canker sisters were different from any other denizens of the Cul-De-Sac. They were never of the earthly plane of existence. Instead, they are the children of demons not too dissimilar from the succubi of human lore. They seem to possess abilities impossible by the standards of others, such as the ability to appear nearly anywhere instantly. They were sent from hell to torment the already tortured souls of the neighborhood. Surprisingly, they are attracted to the Eds for unknown reasons, although it is speculated that they are the weakest-willed members of the neighborhood and are seen as easy targets for them. Despite that, they are all universally loathed and often feared by everyone, including the Eds.
Shh. Can you hear it? Listen closely. Some of you may think it's just the wind, but what if it wasn't? What if it was something more than just air molecules vibrating in the distance? What if it was more than just the atmospheric pressures rising and falling? What if it was darker than a simple current brought on by the rotation of the planet? They are called the Howlers, and it's a very appropriate name. Their voices so distant, but right outside. Voices so common that we dismiss them as an act of nature. They watch from the trees. They scream at your window. They wait for the perfect opportunity when you are alone to strike. The sound of shrieks and the clattering upon your house. That's just them trying to get in. They are said to be very old and extremely patient. Though solid materials impede their reach, they will persist. They will try anything to steal you away, to grab you while you're least expecting. Have you ever stayed at a park or a friend's house too long, only to dread the long, dark walk home? That's where they wait. Most people are lucky. They push on through, denying the sounds resonating through their ears. But some people vanish into thin air. Sure, officials assume that it's just an act of violence brought on by psychotic individuals. Sometimes, this is the case. But there are those who disappear so abruptly, so without a trace, that a simple explanation as human intervention would be too easy. The reason I am telling you this, so each and every one of you can maintain some type of knowledge, some edge above the others, to maintain an appropriate level of caution. When you are walking home alone, and you hear that noise, that spine-chilling scream in the distance, pick up your pace. Or when you are sitting in your room by yourself, and you notice you've left your window open, shut it, quickly. For the Howlers are everywhere, and nowhere. They are here and there. But most of all, they are hungry. Now that you know of them, it's probably best not to think about it. Even if they are watching you, right now.
Before I start this off, I just want to say, this is the first time anything like this has ever happened to me. I'm not normally a cannibal. There's a sentence I never expected to type. I've always been very normal, well-adjusted person. I feel like I should be freaking out a lot more than I am right now, but I'm not, and I think that's what freaks me out the most. I think I'm in denial. I hope I'm in denial. I hope typing this out helps me. I've been house sitting for the past couple of weeks for some family friends. They're the kind of rich people who put solar panels on everything. Their house is big, eco-friendly, with fake rustic theme, and a really great high-def TV, which is great for gaming. They're way out in the boonies though. Nothing around for miles except forests and alpaca farms. Really beautiful scenery though. I decided to take a walk through the woods around the property. To be perfectly honest, actually, I was chasing a Vulpix on Pokemon Go. I wandered around for a very long time trying to figure out where the fuck this thing was. I know the footprints mean 100 meters. I never got past 3 footprints. Maybe someone can explain this to me. I mean, that's not my biggest problem right now. I'm losing focus. Anyways, I came to the edge of the property. There's no fence or marker or anything. But I could tell I was nearby Edith Grant's house because the trail got really unkept, and I could see old beer cans and other tracks sticking out of the humus. Edith is a neighbor, and my family friends specifically brought her up when they were giving me information about my jobs around the property. Apparently, she's kind of a nut job. She occasionally came by to complain about noise when there was no noise. And she also liked to show up and angrily preach scripture. She's harmless, they told me, but I'm still supposed to be careful with her. I've been everywhere else on the property, and I hadn't gotten any close to the Vulpix, so I thought, what the hell, and ventured into Edith's land. Soon I started seeing signs. They were nailed to trees and stuck out of the ground, painted on whitewashed wood. They read, "Because she has rebelled against her God, they shall fall by the sword. Their little ones shall be dashed into pieces, and their pregnant woman ripped open." Hosies, 13:16. God hates fags. America's the land of the damned and the home of the beast. He cursed them in the name of the Lord. The 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. Kings, 2:24. I'm paraphrasing here, of course. There were like hundreds of these, and they were huge and nailed up everywhere. There were a couple that looked like they were from the Clinton administration, accusing him of being an antichrist. So I walked through, checking these things out. He just seemed like such an angry person. I remember thinking specifically, what has to happen to a person to make them so hateful? And that's when I saw the dead body. It was cold, bluish white and small. The body of a little boy, probably about 6 years old. About 30 feet in front of me, I walked up to it. It was such a strange, nonchalant feeling. I know I should have been horrified, but I didn't feel horror. I felt curiosity, I guess. The left leg was caught in a rusty bear trap, and I hadn't noticed before. He was wearing a blue windbreaker and a pair of bloody sweatpants. He had brown hair, his eyes were sunken. I couldn't tell how long he'd been dead for. More than a few hours, probably. I don't know much about rigor mortis or anything like that. I could tell you the flesh was very cold and soft. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I decided I had to eat it. It was so fucking surreal. I was looking at the leg, the one in the animal trap, and then I was picking it up, holding it in my teeth. It didn't smell like a dead body. I mean, I guess I don't have a lot of experience with dead bodies. Well, okay, I do now, but you get it. It smelled like ice cream. It smelled like vanilla and sugar. And when I bit into the skin, what came spilling out was, I swear to God, blue funfetti cake. Okay, here's where things get weird. Things were pretty weird already, I guess. But as I was eating this corpse in the woods, I could smell, taste, and see blue funfetti cake. It felt like blue cake in my mouth. But I could hear these awful sounds as I was doing it, like the rendering of flesh and bone and sinew, which is what it was, really. And as I ate and ate, I just got hungrier and hungrier. I didn't know what was going on, and I wasn't questioning it at all that much. I ate the entire thing, a whole small human corpse. A child. And it was delicious. Here's another weird thing. The body had all sorts of weird marks on it. Weird looking burn marks, bruises, cuts, and what looked like stab wounds. It was pretty clear that this boy had been badly abused before he was murdered. I wasn't thinking about that at the time, though. All I could feel at the time was this intense need to keep shoveling blue cake flesh into my mouth. When I was finished, all I had left was the blue jacket, bloody pants, and dirty sneakers, which I stuck into my backpack. I hung out there for a while, just trying to comprehend exactly what I'd just done. It was only after about 45 minutes of contemplation that I finally looked up and saw Edith's farmhouse poking out over the hill. She was sitting on her upstairs porch. She was watching me. When I saw her, she stood up and went back inside her house. I walked back home. Never found the Vulpix. Maybe I should have stopped looking for the Vulpix. I don't know. I think I should have run home, called the police or something. I didn't. I felt really weirdly chill about the whole ordeal. And I guess maybe I convinced myself it hadn't happened. I made myself some tea and watched the sitcom rerun on the high-def TV. I probably could have fallen asleep or forgotten about the entire thing, like it had never happened. Except that I brought the backpack of clothes home. A few hours later, I get an Amber Alert on my phone. A little boy has gone missing in my area, and I'm sitting there on these rich people's sofa, feeling extremely full and pretty guilty. I know it can't be the same kid. The corpse I ate belonged to a boy younger than that one gone missing. It was someone's little boy, though, and I'm worried the same thing that happened to him is about to happen again. Here's the thing. I'm 95% positive that Edith Grant is involved in the kidnapping and murder of these kids. Call it a hunch. I'm also 100% positive that I can't go to the police with the evidence I have. the bloody clothes of her murder victim, and the contents of my stomach. Ada saw what I did. She knows that I know. I have to do something. There's more to this mystery than I understand. Help me out. What the hell should I do? I'm all by myself in a house in the woods. It's getting dark. There's a murderer next door. And worst of all, I'm really craving funfetti cake right now.
Our cats came home late one night. Their tails huge, their fur so puffy they could barely fit through the cat door. I figured another cat had scared them, or perhaps an owl, so I turned on the outside light and stood in the backyard, watching. I couldn't see a thing, but I heard a strange voice from the darkness, just beyond the reach of the light. It was calling my cats by their names. I froze, listening. At first, I was confused by the ridiculousness of the situation. I remember thinking how glad I was that most cats don't come when they're called. Then I got angry. Who the hell would be calling my cats in the middle of the night? I searched the yard, but found nothing unusual. I went inside to check on my son, seized by the irrational hope that it was just him pulling a prank. Of course it wasn't. He was snuggled up in his Star Wars sheets, asleep. My wife couldn't hear it. She said that I was crazy. But the cats didn't think so. They hid in those undiscoverable places only cats could find, and they wouldn't come out. After my wife went to bed, I sat by the back window with a flashlight. Every so often, I'd hear it again. Sometimes it sounded like the wind. Other times it was like a voice being forced from a throat lined with broken glass, shredded into a legion of voices, all speaking as one. I called the police. I kept watch by the back window until the doorbell rang. Then I ran to the front door. But nobody was there. I searched the front yard, and the whole time that voice was calling and calling from the back of the house. But something had changed. It wasn't the cats it was calling anymore. Through the house, I heard the back door open and slam shut. The voice stopped. That's when it occurred to me. Cats might not come when they're called, but little boys usually do.
The light went out faster than Steve could react. The water was colder than ice in that instant, and fear pervaded his body like a curse. His face broke the water's surface, and he ran out of the pond. A wolf's howl was all he heard as he ran in his swim trunks down the empty West 15th Street. The problem had been here for longer than the 5 minutes it took to get home. Indeed, much longer. The problem had been here since the dawn of time, whenever that was, for this was the dusk of time. And Steve knew that well. Water was the only thing he thought of that could help him think of something during this dreadful time. Dusk had been coming for years. No one knew what to do to stop it, only that if you were outside, you were at risk. Steve was barely inside when the sound rang through his head. It sounded like the hissing of a snake, but not quite. He looked at his watch. Somehow, in a matter of 5 minutes, it had become complete midnight. The dusk of time was upon them, and Steve was the last person to say goodbye. The sun rose over the empty land. There was nothing. As quick as it had come, it had gone. It was a good story, said the first. It would have made an excellent book, said the second. The story was so short. Chapter 1. Sludge was little more than a pamphlet, but it was longer than the remainder of the book. The story did pick up quickly, however, especially towards the end. The last chapter was only a few millionth the length of the first, but it contained more than any other. Specifically, with one character named Man. It was sad that the story had to end so shortly, and now another one had to be created. But after all, what's another few ants' lives to a human being, anyway?
Whining and a cold nose on my shoulder wakes me up from a deep and dreamless sleep. I open my eyes, and it's still completely dark. I guess my dog has decided that I will be getting up anyway. It figures that on the one day of the week where I get a chance to finally sleep in, that the dog would wake me up in the middle of the night. She almost never gets up before the sun comes up, so I figure that the need to use the bathroom must be very great for her to wake me up right now. Perhaps she licked the bowl of chili that I had left on the table when I got up to use the bathroom last night and is now feeling the consequences. It wouldn't be the first time. I roll over and grab my phone off the nightstand to check the time, but for some reason it won't turn on. The battery must be dead, even though I had plugged it in right before bed. It's an old phone though, and finicky, so sometimes you have to plug it in just right or it won't charge. I had set an alarm for 10 a.m. so that I would wake up just before the football games start to check the injury report and make any last-minute changes to my fantasy teams. Maybe I'm lucky that my dog woke me up if my phone was dead. I wouldn't want to oversleep. You know, it's the fantasy playoffs and I've got a good amount of money riding on this week's outcome. It's still really dark, and I roll over and look towards my window where, even through my closed blinds, I can typically see some light from the street lamp below, but tonight it was completely dark. I can hear someone scraping ice off their car windshield in the parking lot below, and I wonder, why the hell would anyone be awake and headed out at this godforsaken hour on a Sunday? I get up out of bed and flip on the light switch near the door, but the light doesn't come on. I walk across the hall to my bathroom and try that switch. Again, nothing. Great. The power must be out. I guess that would explain the dead phone. About this time I realize that I really need to use the bathroom, so I put the toilet seat down and sit to avoid, spraying everywhere. As I'm sitting there, doing my business, I realize that the power on the whole block must be out. That's why it's so dark, even the streetlights are out. I finish and get up, and I start making my way into the living room. I trip and nearly fall over the dog who is standing in front of the closet where I keep her food and leash. She must really need to go, and I hope I can get my stuff together and take her outside before she has an accident on the floor. I remember that my flashlight and headlamp are both inside my backpack that's somewhere in the closet near the door, buried with a bunch of other camping gear. I tell myself that I should probably be better prepared in the instance of a power outage in the future. I decide rather than digging through all my crap in the closet in the dark for a flashlight, I will just get the lighter out of the drawer in my coffee table and use it to light a candle that's sitting on the table. I slowly make my way into the living room, waving my hands in front of me, trying not to run into anything. I can hear the dog running around by the door from the sound of her tags clinking together. Clearly, her night vision is better than mine. I make it to the couch and feel my way around it to the coffee table, open up the drawer and fumble around it until I find a lighter. I flick it and nothing. Not even a spark. I try again and still nothing. I'm starting to get really annoyed at this point, and I promise myself that I will never buy another one of those shitty lighters again. I'll just spend the extra 75 cents for a name brand. I resign myself to digging through the closet to try and find my flashlight, hidden somewhere inside of my backpack. I stub my toe on the couch on the way and let loose a string of profanities. I finally touch the wall and outstretched my arms and run my hands over the closet door, making my way towards the handle. I turn the handle when suddenly I hear a noise coming from my bedroom. It's the alarm from my phone. The sudden realization comes crashing down on me and I collapse to the floor in panic and shock. I start sobbing uncontrollably and my dog comes over and starts licking my face, wondering what's wrong with me, trying to console me. I hold her head in my hands and look at her, trying to will the image of her face to appear in front of me. But all I can see is blackness.
Try this. Turn off the music. Turn off the TV. If you have to, turn off the computer. Go to another room and sit. In total silence. Do you hear that? That ringing? People say that it's your brain making up a sound to explain the silence. People lie. I can't tell you what's making that sound, but whatever it is, you don't want to meet it. It's trying to break through, force its way onto your plane of existence. Now try this. Repeat the first steps. Turn everything off. And this time, turn the lights off too. Still hear that ringing? Better hope you do. If you don't, it's because they've finally managed to break through, and no amount of running will save you.
There was something about spiders that creeped Billy out. He just didn't know what. What Billy did know was as a 6-year-old kid, he had to be a big boy now. That's what his dad said. He always told Billy to face his fears, whether it be spiders or monsters under the bed. So Billy tried to be like his dad. Dad always told him, "Billy, there are scarier things in life than spiders." Billy hated waking up in the middle of the night. His room was pitch black. He could see 1,000 prickly spiders coming for him. He blinked hard 1, 2, 3 times to clear his head. He thought of Dad. What would Dad do now? Dad wouldn't be scared. Dad told him the only thing scary about the dark is your imagination. There's nothing there. and as Billy's eyes adjusted to the dark, he realized there is nothing there. Thinking of his dad, Billy swung his legs over the edge of his bed and grabbed his plastic sword from the floor. He brandished it in the air, swishing it around for good measure. "I'm not scared!" Billy began dueling with imaginary monsters, vanquishing them with his new ally, his imagination. "Come on then, you stupid monsters!" Billy took another stab at the air. "I'm not scared of you!"
"Okay then, Billy,"
said the voice from under the bed.